Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lora Rolling and this is part 5 of the Santa Claus ornament tutorial. This is the Santa Claus ornament that we are making. It is so cute and shiny. I love it so much. Today we are going to take the units that we've made in parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to combine them all together, creating the ornament itself. Then we're going to make the cap and add the ribbon, completing the ornament all together. I can't wait to do this. I'm super excited. I hope you are too. If you haven't done parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's okay. I'll have them listed down below. Go ahead and go do those first and then come back to this part 5. We just have a few materials to get ready, so let's get them listed and then we can get started. Let's go. So in parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, we made all of these super cute units, and we made 5 of each of them. And now we get to put them together. So you'll want to do parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that you have all 20 of your units before you start this one. And you're also going to need a couple of other items to complete this one. We are going to bead the cap today, so we're going to use the Miyuki Delicas in silver lined gold, opaque dark cranberry, and chalk white, and I'm going to call this gold, red, and white. We'll also need some beading thread and a beading needle. I like to use the Eslon Fire in the color Crystal, and I like the 4-pound. You can also use 6-pound thread if you'd like. Also, I have a size 10 beading needle. You'll need a size 10 or a size 12. For implements, I use my long nose pliers to hold on to my thread, and I cut my thread with my scissors. We're also going to use our plastic crafting ornament in today's project. This is a 2.36 inch plastic crafting ornament. I get them in a 12-pack at my hobby store. Or if you just want one of them, you can find them in my Etsy shop. You just need one. And last but not least, I have a 3/8 inch wide ribbon, just any ribbon of your choice, whatever color you choose or fabric, that's fine. And I have 12 inches cut off for this, so it's going to be about a 6-inch long ribbon that holds the ornament on, and it's used as the hanger for the ornament. Alrighty, so let's thread our needle with 5.5 to 6 feet of thread, and then we can get started. So we're going to start with the very first unit, which is one of our number 1, the gift units. And we're going to add our thread to the top quadrant of this unit. So what I'm going to do is just pick a random bead and sew through it. And then I'm going to pull the thread all the way up until I have the teensiest little tail, like maybe 1/2 inch of a tail. And then I'm going to sew down the bead that's right next to the one that we're coming out of. And we have a lot of thread on our needle, so my number 1 tip is to go slow when you are pulling that thread through, and that way it doesn't knot up as often. Alrighty, so now I'm going to zigzag. I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to sew up the bead right next to it. And hiding my thread, I'm now going to gently pull my tail until the tail disappears into that first bead. Now, being very careful, I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to sew up the bead right above it. And I'm going to sew up the bead right above that one. And then I'm going to zigzag again. So I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to sew down the bead right next to it. And sew up the bead next to that one. Taking it slow, pulling that thread through. Now it's pretty secure. I can kind of tug on it. I mean, I'm not using all my might to tug, but tug it enough that all of the thread disappears so you can't see it at all. Now I'm just going to sew up the beads until I get to this top corner bead right here. Okay, so the way I do that is I pretty much do it 2 at a time. And once I get to this corner bead, that's where I'll stop and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. I'm going to sew down the next 2 beads, and that places our thread in position to connect our second unit. So we're going to grab one of the number 1, the gift, and we're going to make sure that the connector beads are on the right hand side and there are no connector beads on the left hand of the newest unit that we're adding. Okay, so if there are connector beads on the left hand side, it just means that your triangle is flipped in the wrong direction. So just flip it over, and so you have your connector beads on the right of the one that our thread is coming out of, but you don't have connector beads on the left of the new one. So now we're going to just sew through the second sticking out bead on the new unit that we're adding, and then we're going to sew through the next sticky outie down on the first unit, and we're going to keep crisscrossing like this, or I should say zigzagging, making sure that the threads are not crossed at all. Okay, that's so very important. We're going to keep on doing that all the way down, and once you have a couple, you can pull them together and it makes it easier to zip it on up all the way down. So go ahead and do that back and forth until you come out of this corner bead on the new unit that you just added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, now we are coming out of this bottom corner. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads. And now we are in position to add our next unit, which is the third number 1, the gift unit. Making sure that our new unit does not have connector beads on this side. It does have connector beads on the right, but it doesn't have any where we're sewing. So we're going to grab that second sticky outie and we're going to zigzag all the way up. just like we did before, back and forth, and making sure that none of our threads are crossing at all. Zip it up all the way up until we are coming out of this corner bead on the new unit that we just added, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this top corner bead. We're going to sew down one bead, and that puts our thread in position to add the top of the gift, which has the little bow on it. Remembering that there are no connector beads on the left hand side, but there are connecting beads on the right, and we're going to connect this by catching that first sticking out bead, and then just like before, we're going to zigzag back and forth, making sure that our thread is not crossed at all, and we're going to zip it on up until we come out of this corner bead on the gift unit, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next two beads, and we are in position to add our fourth gift unit, making sure there are no connector beads on the left hand side. We're going to catch the second bead and zigzag all the way down until we are coming out of this corner bead on the new unit, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next two beads. And now we are ready to put on our fifth and final gift unit, making sure that there's no connector beads on the left hand side. We're going to sew through the second sticking out bead, and then the second sticking out bead on the bigger unit. Zip it on up, and I will meet you at this top corner bead on the newest unit that we just put on. I'll meet you there. Alrighty, we are coming out of this top corner bead. We're going to sew down one bead, putting our thread in position to add the two beards. This is the second one that has the bow, and we're making sure that there are no connector beads on the left and there are connector beads on the right. And then we're going to catch that first sticking out bead. Go ahead and do your zigzag back and forth until we end in this corner bead on the big unit, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead, and we are going to sew down the next two beads. And this time we're not going to add a new unit, we're just going to connect these two gift units together. So pick up the second, sew through the second sticking out bead on, this would have been the first gift that we started with, and we are now going to connect it to the fifth gift that we added. So just keep zigzagging all the way down until you finish in the bottom corner bead of the 5th gift unit that we added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, now that we're coming out of this corner bead, we're going to connect all 5 of the corner beads by sewing them in a circle. So we're going to sew through the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and the 5th one. And now we're going to sew through the same one that we started with. And now we're going to sew through 4 beads. So we're going to go through the second one again, the third one, the fourth one, and the 5th one. Stopping here, let's pull the thread tight so that circle is super, super tight. And then we're going to sew up the bead right above where our thread is coming out. Then we're going to sew through the center bead of these 3 beads. And that pulls it together perfectly. Now we can pick any bead that we want, hiding our thread. We're going to sew all the way up until we end in this corner bead, or not the corner bead, this 3rd bead. It's the center bead in the row that has 3. That's a little hard to explain, but hopefully you can see that there are 3 beads in this row. There are only 2 beads in this row, and then you have your corner beads. So we're sewing through the middle bead that has the 3 beads in a row, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this center bead. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads, making sure that we end in our corner bead. Now we can sew through 1 bead, putting our thread in position to add another 2 beads, or the bow unit. So making sure that we have no connector beads on the left. We do have connector beads on the right. We're going to grab that first sticking out bead, sew through that one, and then sew through the next sticking out on the big unit, making sure that your threads are not crossing at all. Zip it on up until you end in this corner bead on the new unit that you just added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, we're coming out of this corner bead, but I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how fun is it to add the units and see the image actually come together. I just love adding this bow unit, the 2 beards unit, to the gift, just because I see the gift like completely. I love it. I'm addicted. I don't know how else to explain that. It is so satisfying. I just love this part so much. I hope that you do too. I really get a kick out of making these, if you can't tell. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're going to sew up the next 2 beads. And now we are able to add our first Santa's face unit. So making sure that there are no connector beads on the left-hand side. We are coming out of this first sticking out bead, so we're going to catch the second sticking out on Santa's beard. And I'm making a knot. Oh no, I've got a good one in there. Let's see. Oh good, I caught it in time. I can straighten it out. Okay, And that happens all day, every day in the life of a beader, right? Alrighty, so now we're going to sew through the next sticking out, and we're going to zip it on up until we come out through this corner bead on the first Santa's face that we added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew through the next bead. And I am happy to announce that we get to add our very first Santa's hat. So we're going to complete our Santa look too. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay, so let's start by sewing through the first sticking out bead on Santa's hat, and then the second bead on Santa's face, making sure that we are not crisscrossed, and we're going to zip it on up until we end in this corner bead on Santa's face, and I will meet you there. Okay, so we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next two beads, and we are now in position to add another 2 beards unit, making sure that there are no connector beads on the left hand side, but there are connector beads on the right. We're going to connect by sewing through the second sticky out bead, and the second sticky out on the big unit. We're going to zip it all the way up until we come out of the corner bead in Santa's face, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead, and we're going to connect all 5 of the corner beads in a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to sew through all 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then pull tight and sew through 3. 1, 2, and 3. Alrighty, pull nice and tug it nicely so that it's a nice tight circle. And now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew up the bead right next to that, following our thread path. And then we're going to catch this first sticky outie, and then the next sticking out bead, and we're going to zip it on up until we end in this corner bead right here, and I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next 2 beads. And now we get to add another Santa's face, making sure that there are no connector beads on the left-hand side. We're going to catch the second sticking out bead, and we're going to zigzag it all the way up until we end in this corner bead on the new unit, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew through 1 bead, And now we get to put on Santa's hat. So making sure that the connector beads are not on the left, but they are on the right, we're going to catch this first sticking out bead and zip it on up, zigzagging until you get to this corner bead, and I will meet you there. Okay, now we are coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew down the next 2 beads, and then we are in position to connect the 2 beards. Okay, so let's catch the second sticking out. Now remember, we're not adding a new one, we're just using what's already there in place. We're just going to zip them up and zip it all the way up until you reach the corner bead on the bottom tip of Santa's beard, and I will meet you there. Okay, so let's zip up and tighten up this little circle by sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then sew through 4 more. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to pull it tight. We're going to sew up the bead right above the one that we're coming out of, and then we're going to sew up that center bead where there are 3 in a row. Now we just want to choose any bead hiding our thread until we have sewn all the way up until this center bead where there are 3 in a row, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so we're coming out of this center bead. We're going to sew up the bead to the right of it and sew through this corner bead. Then we're going to sew down 2 beads. One and 2, which puts us in position to add another Santa's face, making sure that there are no connector beads on the left-hand side. We're going to catch this second sticking out, and go ahead and zip it on up until you get to the corner bead on the new unit that we just added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next 2 beads, and now we are in position to add our last 2 beards unit. So making sure that there are no connector beads on the left-hand side. Let's catch the second sticking out bead and zip it on up until we are coming out of the corner bead on the newest unit that we just added, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. We can sew down the next 2 beads, And now we are in position to add another Santa's face. Making sure that there are no connector beads on the left-hand side. We're going to catch the second sticking out bead and the second sticking out bead on the big unit. Oh. We don't want to twist up our threads at all, no crisscrossing, right? Zip it all the way up until you end in this corner bead right next to the bow on the big unit, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew down 2 beads. One and 2. And then we can zip up this gift, putting the bow on top. Let's catch the second sticking out bead and zip it on up until we end in this corner bead right here. And I'll see you there. Okay, so now we are in position to zip up our circle. So let's sew through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corner beads, and then sew through all 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull tight and sew through 1 more. And we are now going to zigzag. Oh wait, first we're going to sew up this bead right here. And then through the center of the 3 beads, the center bead. And now we get to hide our thread just by moving through all of these beads until we end in this center bead of the row of 3 golden beads up here. And I will meet you there. Okay, now we are coming out of this center bead that is in the row of 3, this one right here. So we're going to sew through the bead right above it and the corner bead, and then we're going to sew through the next bead right there. Now we are in position to add another one of Santa's hats. So making sure that our connector beads are not on the left-hand side, we're going to catch that first sticking out bead and zip it on up until we end in this corner bead right here on Santa's face, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. I'm going to show you how to follow the thread line so that we can put on this Santa's hat. So you don't want to show your thread at all. So what we want to do is go through the beads that we've already sewn through and follow the same exact path. We're going to sew down that next bead. Then we're going to sew down the center bead of the row of 3. Now we can sew up the right hand bead of that row of 3, the one that's right next to it, and up the bead right above that one. So following our thread path, now we can sew through this corner bead, and then we're going to do that same thing here. We're going to sew down that first bead, then we're going to sew down the center bead in the row of 3, and now we can sew up the right bead in the row of 3 and up the bead right above that one. Now we can sew through this corner bead and then sew through the one bead right next to it, and we are in position to add another Santa's hat. So making sure that our connector beads are not on the left hand side, we're going to catch that first sticking out bead, and just like before, we're going to zigzag until we end in the corner bead that is on Santa's face, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of our corner bead. Let's sew down the next 2 beads, and now we get to join the other side of the beard. So let's sew through the second sticking out bead, zip it on up, and I will meet you in this corner bead right here. Okay, so now we get to tighten up these 5 beads, these 5 corner beads. So sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sew through 4 more. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pull nice and tight so that circle comes together, and it will get tighter. Let's sew through the next bead up, and then sew through that center bead that's in the row of 3. And now when you pull tight, you'll see that it really does come together. Now go ahead and hide your thread by sewing up all of these beads and ending in the center bead in the row of 3 golden right there, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this center bead of the 3. We're going to sew up the next bead and the corner bead, and then let's sew down the next 2 beads. And now we are in position to add our last Santa's face, making sure that our connector beads are not on the left hand side, but they are on the right. Let's catch the second sticking out bead on Santa's face and go ahead and zip it all the way up until you get to this point on Santa's beard, the corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's zip up these 5 in a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now let's sew up the next 2 beads. One and 2. Now we are in position to tighten up these 2 or combine them. But before we do that, let's take our ornament and slide it in. If we zip it up before we put our ornament in, then the ornament might not fit. So this is the time to do this. And now we can start zipping this up, and then we can stop at this corner bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we are coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up 1 bead, and now we are in position to add our last unit, which is Santa's hat, and we're going to make sure that the connector beads are not on the left, but they are on the right, catching that first sticking out bead, and we're going to zip it on up until we end in this corner bead of the new unit that we've just put on, and I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's tighten up the circle, sewing through all 5 corner beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pull tight, and then sew up the next bead. And now we can zip it up until we get to this bead right here. It's the connector bead, so it's sticking out. It's the 4th bead on this hat, Santa's hat. I hope that is not confusing, but end in the sticking out bead. Okay, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this bead right here, and you'll notice there's a little gap, so we're going to close the gap. But before we do that, let's make it easier on ourselves by taking out the little cap, the silver cap. The way I do this is I pull it up until it kind of stops, and then you'll see that it easily goes on and off, right? So I'm going to just set that aside, and it's going to be so much easier to sew around this little thing, this little circle, without catching on that loop. You can also even push the circle way off to the side because these aren't connected yet, so it makes it, you know, get out of the way. Alrighty, so we're coming out of this bead. We're just going to sew down the next bead, sew down the bead right under that one, and pull, and that will close that gap. Now we're going to sew up the next 2 beads, ending in the bead that's furthest to the corner right there. Okay, and the reason we do this is we're following our thread path, right? So now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew down the bead right next to it, starting, it's the furthest one to the left of these 4 top beads. Now we're going to sew up the bead right next to it, sew down the bead right next to that one, sew down the second bead on the second row, then sew up the 2 end beads. That will get us to connect to this. So now we can sew down these 2 beads, and now we are in position to start zipping it up. So sew through the second sticky out and zip it on up until you get to this corner bead right here, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's tighten up this circle of 5 by sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pull tight, and now we're going to sew up the bead that's right below the corner bead that we're coming out of, and through the center bead of the row that has 3 golden beads. Now we're just going to hide our thread by sewing through random beads all the way until we get across Santa's hat, and we're going to end in this corner bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's zip up the 5 beads in a circle, but first let's make sure that our cap hole is where it's supposed to be. That way this can lay down flat, making it easier for us to sew this circle. So sew through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then sew through 3. 1, 2, and 3. Pull tight and sew up the next bead. Then catch the next one. That's the center one on the row of 3 golden beads, and it happens to be the first sticky outie. And go ahead and zip it on up until you get to this sticky outie right here, and I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to connect or fill in the gap by sewing down the next bead. Now we're going to sew down the bead right under that one, and then sew up the bead right next to that and up that corner bead. That's the last bead in the row. That fills in that gap, and now we are ready to follow our thread path and move over to the first bead in this row, then up the next bead, the one right next to it, down the bead next to that, down the second bead in the second row, and then up the bead next to that and up that sticky outy bead. And now we are in position to zip this up. So catch the first two beads and I would sew through at least 5 or 6 of these while zipping up before I pull it nice and tight. You don't want to put too much pressure on those first couple of beads. We definitely don't want a bead to break at this point because we are almost done, right? Our ornament is looking fabulous. So I've got like 5 or 6. Let's pull it tight. Makes it nice and firm. Zip it on up and I will meet you in this corner bead right here. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew through all 5 of the circle beads, the corner beads, making a tight circle. 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pull tight, and then sew up the next bead, the one that's closest to the bead that you're coming out of, and then through that center of the 3 beads in a row. Now catch any bead that you want, hiding your thread all the way over until you get to this corner bead right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, now let's tighten up these 5 beads by sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sew through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Pull tight. Sew up the bead right next to the one we're coming out of, and through that first sticking out bead, oops, that first sticking out bead, and zip it on up until we end in this sticking out bead right here, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this bead. We're going to tighten up that gap by sewing down the next bead, sewing down the bead under that one, sewing up the bead right next to that, and up that last bead in the top row. Pull tight, making sure that that gap is nice and tight. Now we're going to sew down the first bead in the next row, still on the top. Sew down 2 more beads, 1, 2, and then zigzag. Go up the bead right next to that one and down the bead right next to that. And sometimes you have to shift the little circle out of the way like I just did to get my needle to fit correctly. We don't want to put pressure on our beads because we don't want to break one. I'm going to sew down one more, and then I'm going to zigzag again, which doesn't make it easy with that little hole right there, but and then I'm going to sew down the next one. Now I'm going to sew through 2 more beads, and then I feel like I can cut my thread. But before I do, let's see, let's get through this second bead. Before I cut my thread, I'm going to double check that all of my circles are nice and tight, that we haven't missed anything in our ornament. Everything looks amazing and tight and secure. I'm going to center this perfectly. Now I'm going to take my long nose pliers and hold on to my thread, and I'm going to take my scissors, which are somewhere around me. Where am I? Hold on. Here they are. Okay. Had them on a different table. And holding my thread and holding the ornament up a little bit, I'm going to put a little pressure just so I get as close as possible, and then I'm going to cut my thread. So now our ornament is complete. We can put our cap back on just by placing it on and then pushing the loop in. And now our cap is on. Now we get to bead the cap. So let's pour out our beads in a little pile and thread our needle with 2 feet of thread, and then we can start beading the cap. Okay, so I have threaded my needle with 2 feet of thread, and we're going to start by picking up 40 white beads. Once you have 40 white beads, then sew through the first bead that you put on, and that will create a little circle of your beads. Now we're going to do circular peyote. So pick up 1 white bead, and we're coming out of this bead, we're going to skip this bead and sew through the next. Then pick up 1 more bead. Coming out of this bead, we're going to skip this bead and sew through the next. Pick up another bead. Coming out of this bead, we're going to skip this bead and sew through the next. And at first, it's really kind of jumbled. It looks like a mess, but if you pull your thread tight enough, you'll start to see the pattern. Looks like 1 bead, then 2 beads, 1 bead, then 2 beads, 1 bead, then 2 beads, and so on. So go ahead and pull your thread so that you have about a 6-inch tail, and continue adding 1 bead at a time until you have completed the row, which is 20 beads in all, and I will meet you on the 20th bead. Coming out of this bead, skipping this bead, sewing through the next, and I will meet you on the 20th bead. Okay, so now I have my 19th bead on. I just picked up my 20th bead, and we're going to skip this bead and sew through the next, and also step up by sewing through the next bead. So now we have a full circle of what looks like 2 and then 1, 2 and then 1, 2 and then 1. So now we take our ornament and we're going to slip that circle onto the cap. And then we can, once we have it on, we can pull those 2 pull the tail and pull the long thread, the one that we're working with, and it should look something like this. Now we need to, this one is supposed to be kind of up against this bead, and that will happen eventually once we get it all nice and settled. Now we're going to start adding gold beads. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to position our thread in one of these top sticking out beads, and mine happens to be coming out of a bottom sticking out bead. So I'm just going to sew up the next 2 beads, and that will get it in position. That's a lot easier than taking the round off again and trying to put it back on the ornament, and you know, it's just a lot easier just to sew into the position. So now we are in position to pick up gold beads. So we'll do the same thing, pick up 1 gold and sew through the next sticking out bead, 1 gold, and sew through the next. And we're going to keep on doing this until we've added 20 gold beads, and we're trying to do it you know, easily so that it doesn't slip off of the cap, and just try to sew as smoothly as possible. Don't pull it too quickly or anything, or the cap will come off. And it's okay, because towards the end you'll realize that nobody tugs on your ornament, so you don't have to glue it into place or anything. It's just going to be just fine having it just set on the top of the cap. Alrighty, so add 20 of these golden beads, and I will meet you at the 20th. Okay, so now I'm adding my 20th bead. Let's sew through the sticking out and then sew through the first gold bead that we put on. Pull the tail and the long working thread nice and tight, keeping that ring snug on the cap. I also like to put my finger kind of on the back of the work, holding it on. Now we're going to do 20 more gold beads. So pick up 1 bead and sew through the next. We're going to do this one all the way around. So I will meet you at the 20th bead. Okay, so now I'm adding my 20th bead. I'm going to sew through the gold bead and sew through the next one, stepping up, and now we are ready to start adding the red beads. So add 20 red beads now, and I will meet you at the 20th. Okay, now I have my 20th bead on my needle. Let's sew through that last gold and stepping up, sewing through the first red bead that we put on. Now at this point, I pull it nice and tight so it's super secure. And if you'll notice, the beads are right at the edge. Now this would be considered the 6th row of round. And in my pattern, it's optional to add this 6th row, but so if you do want it to be a little higher than the cap, then add 1 more round of 1 bead each. So 20 more beads in all, 1 at a time, and I will meet you at the 20th. Okay, so I have my 20th red bead. I'm going to sew through that first bead that we put on and stepping up, so sewing through 2 beads. And now we have added all of the beads to the cap, making it look so cute. Okay, and so now we're going to end our thread. We're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew in the opposite direction, the bead right below it, and then the opposite direction of the bead below that. And we're going to pull on the tail thread and the working thread at the same time, making sure that it's nice and tight. Now we're going to do that again. We are coming out of this white bead. Let's sew through the 2 beads right below that bead, and then zigzag going up the bead next to that one, and then down the next. Well, gosh, look at that. I caught 4 beads this time, and that's perfect because I was going to sew up another 2 beads before cutting my thread. Now I can cut my thread, making sure this cap does not come off. I'm going to hold onto my thread with my long nose pliers, and I'm going to get the scissors as close to the bead as possible and cut my thread. Now I'm going to put my needle on my tail thread, and let's see if I can get this in one shot. Look at that. Luck is on my side. That doesn't always happen. Okay, so now we are coming out of this bead. We're going to sew the opposite direction in the bead right above it, and then the opposite direction again, the bead above that one. Now I'm going to sew up 2 beads, and actually let's sew up a 3rd bead because we need 3 beads in a row in order to zigzag, right? So I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to sew down the gold bead and then up. Let's see if we can catch. Oh, we caught 3 this time. So 3, and now I'm going to just sew up 1 more bead, and then I feel good about being able to cut my thread. So holding on to my thread and getting as close to the beads as possible. And now we can add the ribbon. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our 12 inches of the ribbon. I cut a 12-inch mark, and we're going to fold it in half and try to get those edges as close to uniform as possible. And then I'm going to wrap it around 2 fingers, and I'm going to pull the edges through. Now I'm going to try to cinch this little knot up as close as possible, leaving just about ½ an inch of the end of the ribbon and pulling it into a knot. Now we have this end, which is our loop. I'm going to pinch the loop and pinch it again, and now it will fit through the little hoop. Push it through, and now we can open up the loop, and we're going to try to do this as nice as possible. So flip the ribbon so that it's kind of flat through the hoop, and now put the end through the loop, and now we are going to pull the loop, trying to make it as neat as possible. And mine didn't turn out very neat this time, so I'm going to manipulate it a little bit, tugging, and there we go. Cute little loop It's not perfect this time, but that's okay. Nobody's going to notice. It turned out so cute. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. I hope you love your ornament as much as I love these. I love making them, and I love making them with you. I will see you in just a second. We have now completed our ornament. I love it so much. I hope you love yours too. Thank you so much for being here with me today and throughout this project. I really enjoy beading along with you. Remember to like and subscribe and hit the bell button so you're notified when the next video comes out. I have a new project in store for you that I know you're going to love. I can't wait to see you there. Thanks for watching.